Let's begin with this. How would you describe this book to somebody who has not read it or is thinking of reading it?
So it's called The Book of Gifts, and it's really about the giving and receiving of gifts and the whole psychology around that. And so in a way, it sounds a little bit like a self-help book when you first hear the title, but it's actually, in a way, the opposite. Although I hope you do come away from it feeling that you've been fed in some sort of way, and you've got sort of food for living, because that's what I think literature is and should be. At the center of the novel is this boy called Julian, and near the beginning of the novel, he has fallen off the chapel tower at school, although there is a possibility that he might have jumped or he might have been pushed. And so the novel is structured a little bit like a murder mystery, because it then goes backwards in time, where we try and find out what caused this event, what might have been the trigger for this action. So it's structured like a murder mystery, and it goes between the lives of his mom, his aunt, and his uncle. And it's narrated from different points of view. So each time you get a slightly more complex view of not only what might have happened, but of those central characters in the story. So it centers on family. My previous novels, the last couple, have all been much more about race and kind of state of the nation works of literature, whereas this looks at one simple family and tries to kind of find the big picture in the micro, in a one particular family unit. It tries to speak for much bigger things.
You've previously, very briefly referred to the title just now, but maybe just go a little bit further into it. Why this title? What does it refer to?
So I was in conversation with a woman called Professor Supan Sale, and she's the Freud expert in South Africa. She teaches at Wits, or used to teach at Wits. And she told me about this concept called the unholy exchange. And that's basically the giving over of one forbidden thing in order to get another forbidden thing. It comes from this case of Sigmund Freud's called the Dora case. And I just thought that was a really interesting starting point idea for a novel, where someone hands something over that's forbidden in order to get something else that's forbidden. And so the novel really has got a lot of psychoanalytic concepts that are running through it. And you don't have to really be an expert in psychoanalysis to understand the novel, but if you know a little bit about those things, then it probably enriches your reading in a way. I put a lot of psychoanalysis into the novel when I wrote it, and then I took most of it out again. So it's sort of there under the surface for those who want to kind of dig into it. So, I mean, Oedipal concepts run through these sort of Oedipal triangles are running all the way through the novel. There's the novel is enacting a kind of dramatic conflict between what Freud called the death drive and Eros, which is the sort of life drive. And in a way, the death drive is sort of embodied in one of the characters, Jennifer. And she's the sort of antagonist of the novel. I mean, what I've done in this novel, and I think I've done it without fully knowing in the last couple of novels, is to set up a genre novel with all the expectations that come with that genre. So this is sort of structured like a crime thriller, and you think there's a sort of a goodie and a baddie and an antagonist and that sort of thing. But by the end, what I've done is I've sort of unearthed the human beings from that genre so that their humanity is kind of restored. I think with a lot of these genre novels, like crime novels, you get characters who are sort of types, and then they sort of remain in that role until the end. And I don't think that people in the real world conform to types. They might share some properties of a particular type, but people are much, much more complex. And I think literary fiction, which is what I'm involved with, is really about restoring the complexity to the world, so that we come away from the books like that feeling much more sensitive and alive to what is out there in the world, the complexity of what is, and maybe hopefully a little bit more compassionate, a little bit more empathetic, a bit more sensitive to how complex things are, so that we live in a slightly more careful way with ourselves and each other.
And people seem to really connect with that part of your novels, because, I mean, one of your books is a matric set work. Am I not correct?
Yeah, so my novel, The Dream House, is the IEB matric set work. It was last year, it is this year, it will be next year. So it's a 3-year thing. And yeah, so there's probably about 10,000 matric students studying it every year. for that period, which is fantastic for a writer because it means there's this whole young generation of readers who are engaging very critically with your book. Some very critically, some are very outspoken in their criticism because they automatically resent you because you're just the guy who wrote their matric set work. So a couple of people just automatically hate you. But I mean, I have been really blown away by the responses of the vast majority of the students who really seem to love it. And that was sort of set up like a psychological thriller and a sort of farm murder novel. And you thought that, it was going to end in bloodshed. But as I do with the Book of Gifts, by the end, people are just people. And all those things you think are going to happen don't actually happen. And it's not actually a book about hate. It's actually a book about love in the end. Or it's also a book about love. It's not just a book about hate. And yeah, I mean, I think that's what literature does. It stages these battles between forces of darkness and forces of light, and I think all my novels tend to do that. But I do try and write novels that have a strong storyline as well. So that you want to turn the next page, you want to know what's going to happen next, and then there's a whole lot of stuff under the surface there that you can kind of dig into if you want to. But I like the reader to want to turn the next page because that's something that novels can do really well. I'm always sort of intrigued by writers who say that they're anti-narrative because there's really no such thing. If you have pages that are following in a sequence, you have a series of events, you have a narrative, and so you want that narrative to be compelling and engaging as much as you possibly can.
So part of this novel to me seemed a bit like a Bildungsroman, like the part that concerns Julian, because it's about him growing up. He meets this girl while they're on holiday, and things change for him. He kind of falls in love for the first time, if we can call it that, and events that happen there then have this effect on him for the rest of his life. So tell me about exploring that as well.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, the novel starts and you think, oh, Julian's going to be the protagonist, he's going to be the main character, but actually he's in hospital for much of the action of the novel and is kind of completely absent. So he's the sort of opaque center around which the central action of the novel actually revolves. And I'd argue that his mom, Emma, is probably the protagonist because she's the one who is at the center of all these conflicting relationships, and she's the one who has to negotiate those and make meaning from them and make sort of decisions about them. And I tried to give all of my characters a kind of character arc so that there is some sort of growth and evolution. I think in everyday life, it's quite hard for people to change. In literature, we do want there to be a change because if there isn't a process, if they end up where they were at the beginning, I'm not sure there's really much point, certainly in writing the book or in reading the book. You want to be taken on a journey of transformation. So literature does tend to sometimes push that transformation thing more than we get in our everyday lives. I think often in everyday life, it takes a death or a violent event or an extreme event, maybe a marriage or a birth of a child or something, to rejig our lives in a sort of fundamental way. Sometimes it can be the loss of a job or something. But novels tend to dramatize exactly those moments, those extreme moments that rupture things and displace things and get characters onto a new track and a new path. I think all the adult characters in the novel are all running away from reality in a way. They're all finding ways of escaping confronting the real in their lives. So there's Andrew, who's a psychotherapist, and he kind of finds refuge in his patients and lives vicariously through them. Jennifer drinks heavily, and I think she tries to find escape from her pain in alcohol. And Emma, who's a sculptor, who's Julian's mom, she finds refuge in art. In creating sculpture and escaping from the world through art. And by the end, all those characters have to sort of try and confront the things they've been running away from. So it is a kind of Bildungsroman for those characters, and also for Julian in a way that he learns to detach from the world of adults. He's a single child, and he's one of those children who grows up in what the novel calls this architecture of adults. And he's not really spending much time with other children. So he's sort of in an adult world, but he's not an adult. And I think by the end of the novel, he's disengaged from that, and he's just a little boy again, and he can live on in a new way. So although the novel does go to some quite dark places, and there's some quite hectic events, it is a very positive and redemptive novel, I think, by the end.
And love also seems to be a theme, because you've got these two young people who have that connection, that first connection. Then you've got the love between a mother and a son. You've got the lack of love in a marriage. So talk to me about exploring that.
Yeah, I mean, love is a central thing to this novel, and I was looking back. I think love is sort of central to all of my novels, but I think all stories are love stories, in a way. All stories are about desire. You know, in every single story, there's a protagonist who wants something, and usually there's an obstacle to what they want, and the novel is about how they're trying to overcome that obstacle in order to get what they want, or what they think they want. Sometimes it changes during the course of the novel, and they find out by the end that actually they wanted something else, that what they wanted at the beginning was a delusion, and they want something new by the end. So all stories are about desire, and desire is what motivates storytelling. I mean, Woody Allen famously said that you know, books, literature, films are either about love or they're about death, and in a way they're probably about both all the time. That they are about this battle between darkness and light. And the Book of Gifts stages this very consciously, you know, because it's drawing from these psychoanalytic concepts in Freud of the death drive and the life drive, and how each of us has this sort of double helix running through us, like almost like strands of DNA. You know, as Oscar Wilde said, everyone kills the thing that they love, in his poem, The Ballad of Reading Gaol. That as soon as we have something that's of value to us, there's a part of us that wants to sort of end it. And I'm not quite sure why. It's almost like, you know, sometimes we just can't hold it for so long. You know, it's too much. It's human beings can't sort of carry on just feeling one pure thing 100% through time. It gets colored and compromised and rendered ambiguous. And those are some things that literature is looking at, I suppose.
Talk to me about your writing process. Every writer is different in their writing process, I've realized. So talk to me about the way that you write. How do you come up with a story? How do you put it down on paper or on your computer? How do your characters develop?
I usually live with an idea for a couple of years before I even start writing it down. You know, in recent things, I've been writing plays and novels, and they've been sort of feeding into each other. So The Dream House comes from a play called Dream of the Dog, and The White Room comes from a play called The Girl in the Yellow Dress. This one, I did actually start writing it as a play, and then, to be honest, you know, the silent theatre seems so there's so little money, and there's so little happening at the moment. There's so little energy for new writing, that I just thought actually it'd be quicker to write the novel. I don't think I'm probably the first person in history to say that it was quicker to just write the novel than to write the play. But it really did feel that way, because I got a fantastic publisher who's very supportive, and I know they're kind of wanting me to write my next book, and they're wanting to give it space if they can. So I started it as a play, and that's where I got the kind of structure of moving backwards. But then when I started writing it as a novel, you know, it starts with this boy in hospital, and then it goes backwards in time. And they're just all these characters that you don't really know or have a relationship with, sort of having arguments with each other. It just didn't work as a novel. So I left it for a couple of years and wrote my novel, The White Room, instead. And then when I picked it up again, I started in a much more positive and beautiful place, which is when Julian is 3 or 4 years younger, and he's falling in love for the first time. And so you get to know Julian, you get to care about Julian. You get to sort of see the adults in a more normal way, not in the sort of extreme crisis state that the novel then goes to a little bit after that. So it's got these different threads. It's got this sort of thread that happens in Johannesburg over winter, the kind of time that we're moving towards now, which is very dry and grey and colourless and cold. And then it's got this thread that is at Umhlanga Rocks in KZN, and it's very lush and warm and beautiful. And at this kind of luxurious hotel, which in my head is sort of based a little bit on the Oyster Box down in Umhlanga Rocks, although I've sort of changed some of the things about that hotel, because I wanted there to be a sort of tennis court in the back and a sort of jungle. So I've sort of made my own hotel, but it's essentially a lot like the oyster box, and it's got that lighthouse outside, which is quite iconic, which is the lighthouse on the cover. And yeah, so then the novel sort of came to life because it had a lot of life in it, and it had a sort of redemptive thread that was running through it. And so what I try and do in terms of my process, I just try and write a little bit every day. So I sit down for half an hour, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, and I just write a paragraph or work on something. So I just do a little bit every day. And it's amazing, after 4 months, 5 months, you've often got the first draft of a novel. So you just take it a step at a time. I sort of think of it as a brick, that each day you just make a simple brick. And it's how you arrange it in order to catch the light, that you can actually create a whole cathedral out of an accumulation of simple bricks and channeling of light. And that's really all writing is. It's a whole lot of decisions. And then once I've written the first draft, I'll then print it out and then read it, and then I'll make corrections on the manuscript. And then what I do is, at least once, I will retype the entire thing back into the computer. Because I think if you don't do that, what you're essentially doing is you're just editing. You're not really fundamentally rewriting. Whereas I think when you type the whole thing back in the computer, firstly, it's a bit of a mission to type 70,000 words into a computer. So you very quickly find the language or the passages or the scenes that are obstacles to what story you're trying to tell. So those things just automatically, organically fall away, because you think, well, there's no point in typing that out. That's not even necessary. You type down the essential, what is absolutely necessary. And every word, every idea, every comma has to re-earn its way back into the manuscript. And I think that's a really, really useful exercise. And in a way, it feels like it's much harder work, but in a funny way, it makes it all much easier, because you sit down and you know what you're doing today, and you just really enjoy the process of rewriting. I mean, I think the thing I love most about writing is the attempt to kind of fit untested language into untested situations. That for me is what literature is and what literature does. It's the very opposite of cliche, which is the already formulated language for the already formulated situation. Literature does the exact opposite, and I just love that. I love that relationship of language to thing. And as a writer that every act of representation is always going to be doomed to failure. You're never going to be able to represent the real world in any way. It's always going to be much more complex than our representations of it. So you're writing a work of fiction. You're creating a world out of language. But it's a place that people can go to, and it's a place where they can stretch themselves and exercise their empathies and hopefully come away from it feeling like they've gone on this sort of fundamental workout on some sort of level, so that they can apply themselves to their lives in a slightly different way. So I never mistake writing for real life. I never think that any of my characters exist in the world outside of the pages. But I hope that in my writing I'm creating a space that feels sufficiently like life for people to enter into it and be taken to places that their everyday lives don't afford them. I think that's why we read, it's why we write, is to be stretched into new places and to care from places that we didn't think we would ever care from. That's for me what the task is.